This is Joan Walseth Purcell on August 10th, 2022, and I'm speaking to you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. First, let me thank you for agreeing to be recorded for the oral history collection for the Washoe County Museum and Cultural Center in Worland, Wyoming. We have two goals. First, that our class of 1960 tells what life was like for kids and teenagers in Worland from 1941 to 1960. The second goal is that we share how growing up in Worland impacted our adult lives. Would you give me your full name, please?
Carlton Dean Frederick.
And what were you called in high school?
Dean.
Did you have a nickname of any kind?
Yeah, but I'm not going to repeat it on.
Okay. It was not for mixed company?
Not for mixed company.
Okay.
I just.
Yeah, okay. Where were you born? You weren't born in Worland, were you?
No, I was born in Hutchinson, Kansas.
Uh-huh. And what brought your family to Worland?
Oil. My dad was in the oil business.
Okay, what is DOL?
He worked for Gulf Oil Company.
I see. I
And
see.
he was a troubleshooter for when they were drilling. And my folks lived in 19 places in their first 20 years of marriage.
Wow. Wow. But you lived, so when they came to Worland, they were ready to put down some roots, right?
Well, no, it was a typical move that we had been moved to Nebraska, and then they started running into problems in around Worland. So they transferred him to Worland. And they had a little rule in the company that you couldn't have any outside income. Well, Dad had bought a water truck and then leased it to one of the contractors around town. And Gulf Oil found out about it and walked into his office there in Worland one day, asked him if he owned that water truck. He says, yes. They said, pack your desk. And so 20 some years service with the company, and he was out like that. It was on my mom's birthday, and she said it was the best birthday present she'd ever had.
So what did he do after he left Gulf?
He went to work for, I remember the name, the supply company, and selling and going out and getting the rigs and selling drilling supplies and things like that, parts for the rig.
Okay.
And then he bought the gas station across the one across from the Washoe Hotel.
Oh,
Texaco across from the hotel.
okay.
It's, long ago, it's been torn down into a lot. So it's now a parking lot. But then he also bought the Firestone store and ran it for quite a while.
Did they stay in Worland for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, Dad was in Worland when he died. He was at a New Year's Eve party, and they were playing charades. Somebody did something funny, and he went back in a horse laugh and died on the spot.
Wow.
Just
what a way to go.
And there was one of the local veterinarians was there, and a couple of nurses were there. And they didn't try to get into the hospital. He was gone, just like that. Wow. So, and my mom lived on for a great more number of years. And we moved her to Casper. Oh, it was about 10 years before she died.
I see. When you lived in Worland, you lived in town, didn't you?
Yes,
Where
yeah,
did you live?
740 South 15th Street. And when we moved in, it was a big boom area. They were developing houses all over the place. So my playground included a lot of piles of dirt that they had piled up around the houses. And a couple friends of mine and I would go over and we'd build small roads on the hill with our and play with them with our play trucks and things. And it then scrounge around the houses, see if we could find anything that we could use that they had thrown out. But the whole building area, the whole building out there in the Evans Edition, as it was called then, was going on real strong.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I've forgotten. When did you move to Worland? When did your family move to Worland? How old were you?
As close as I can remember, it was the fourth or fifth grade.
Okay.
And I was in the South Side school because I only lived a couple, 3 blocks from it. Then in the sixth grade, I believe it was, sixth or seventh, I switched over to the junior high.
Right. Do you remember anything special about being in elementary school?
No, not really. It's just that I had a good time. I mean,
Good time.
yeah, we had several kids and we always had something going. They let us out for recess. We would get out there and we would get some kind of a game going. It was constantly very nice.
Uh-huh.
And but I've been trying to remember some of the kids' names, and Jim Store.
Oh, I remember him.
No, yeah, when they said, try to remember some of your friends and everything. I had a bad situation with that. All of the people, well, the men that I grew up with and played with and to high school and everything, all of them have died.
Oh, wow.
And I can't think. Well, the only person I was really halfway close with was Lowell Peterson.
Mm.
And I was best man at his wedding. But other than that, I mean, well, Jim Store and I were very close and good friends. Gary Badu and I did a lot of things together. Gary and I particularly went fishing a lot.
Oh.
Our favorite deal was to have a date on Friday or Saturday night. We'd take them home, we'd meet, and we'd head up the mountain, sleep in the car until dawn came, and then start fishing.
Wow. Did your parents know that you were out fishing all night?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was just easier for us to get up in the mountain at night and then be there first thing in the morning. Otherwise, we wasted fishing time.
That's true. That's true. What about when you moved on to the middle school? Do you remember anything, any of the teachers or any of the activities or?
Mrs. Myers, Grant Teeters.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Grant Teeters particularly because he brought his paddle along that he'd used in college in his fraternity. And he had a rule that after we'd had a test, if you watered it up and threw it to the wastebasket, you were fine. If you missed the wastebasket, you had to step forward and get a paddle. And so we would, after a test was handed back, there'd be a few of us who were always wanting him up, trying it, and he kept his word. If you miss, you got a paddle.
Wow.
It was always good fun. The whole class got a big kick out of
I'm sure they did.
it. Joe Kinlan,
Pardon me?
remember Joe Kinlan teaching? Of course, he was also my coach in football. Sonia Song's mother was the secretary.
I didn't remember that.
Well, I did because remember it very distinctly because remember Mrs. Myers, and she could be a little crusty at times. Well, she came in late to class one time, and I had been sitting at my desk, and some girl had dropped her pencil on the floor. And I can't remember who it was. I've been trying to remember who it was, but I reached down and picked up the pencil, and she came over and she demanded that I give her the pencil. And I said, well, can't you say please? Give me that pencil. And about that time, Mrs. Myers walked in and said, what's going on? The girl said, he won't give me my pencil. Mrs. Myers immediately reached down, grabbed me by the ear, and carried me out of the room. I mean, I had a sore ear for a couple, 3 days.
Wow.
But I was standing out there in the hall for maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And she comes out and said, you can come in, sit down, behave now. I couldn't figure out why she let me back in so quick. And I talked to a couple of kids after the class, the day was over. Turns out she got to asking what was going on. And somebody else explained to her that all I was wanting was for the girl to say please. And she wouldn't say please. So I was telling Mrs. Song about it, and when I mentioned what had happened and everything, she says, well, Dean, why didn't you come down to the office? She shouldn't have done that. She said she should have come down to the office and got something done about it. But yeah, I got back into class quickly. So I didn't have a sore ear for a while, like I said.
I'll bet you did. You said you played football. Did you play football in junior high?
Yes. I played football up through the senior year, and it was on the state championship team. And it was real disappointed when we went over to Douglas to play. My folks came along and drove over. And then after the game they picked me up and we took off for Dallas, Texas, to go down and see my sister. My older sister was working down there at the time. And they decided they were going to take off. So I missed the train ride home.
Oh.
Everybody told me how much fun the train ride was, the celebrating that went on and everything. And I had to miss it. But,
too bad. It was a big event.
Yes, it was. I can't believe that they could raise that many people to get enough money to rent a train. How often do you hear about somebody renting a train?
That's right.
So it was just a very memorable time. And of course, I enjoyed the game very much too.
I'll bet. Winning is always fun.
Yes. So
Were there any other activities that you remember at the junior high besides football games?
no. Oh, I remember a play that we put on,
Aha.
and it took. Been trying to remember who all was in it. And
I think that Robbie D. Klein,
oh yeah, okay.
and I think Lane Bailey, and I think Joanne was in it too, maybe. Is that right? Oh, Lowell Peterson was in it. No?
Oh, I can't remember.
Okay.
I just remember it, the play and putting it on
And having fun.
and having fun. And I can't even remember what teacher was helping with it, but
I don't remember the play, but I know a lot of people remember it. What about when you moved on to high school? Do you have any specific memories from high school?
well, I had to follow my older sister, who was valedictorian,
Uh-oh.
and but I enjoyed high school. Well, and by that time, my dad had bought the service station, so I was working at the service station. Well, during football season, I didn't have to go to work after school, but after football season, I went to work at the station every night and most weekends. And
What did you do at the station?
oh, a little bit of everything. Sold gas, or washed windows then, and you check the oil and you check the tires. That was a standard procedure. Then I learned how to change oil in vehicles. We had a wash bay in the back of the station that had high-powered hot water, and so I would a lot of times wash the bottoms of the trucks and cars because so many people, especially the oil contractors, were out in the field, and they would come in and the bottoms of their vehicles would be just solid mud. And so we had the only station in town that had the high-powered hose. So we got a lot of the vehicle washing. And a wash job would cost you $2.75. And
Wow.
it would take me better than an hour to do a car because we had a big jack that would hook on to the rear axle of the vehicle and lift it up so I could sit there and wash down the whole bottom of the truck. And then, of course, I had to wash the top side and clean the inside. And, so it was at least an hour-long job, and we got several of those in there. And eventually, I'd have to empty out the mud pit.
Did you get paid?
Oh yeah, I remember it. I got paid. I think it was about $30 a week and a tank of gas.
Wow.
And of course, the hired help were all making $1.25 or something like that an hour. And I think I figured out one time I was making about 25 cents an hour.
Well, that's a lot of us earned that in that day, I think.
Yeah, but I also found out later my dad was putting each month, he'd put some into my savings account, my college account.
Oh, wow.
So he was making up the pay that way.
That was a good idea. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
nice little benefit.
So I had a lot to pull from when I went off to college.
What do you remember anything about World War II?
At the time, I was in Kansas, and we were living in an oil camp. And the thing I remember about it most is everybody on that oil camp was working 12 to 15, 16 hours a day because they were supplying oil constantly for the war effort. And I remember being on this oil camp, Claflin, Hollywood, Kansas. And there wasn't anybody else my age around there. There were a couple of college or high school boys, and my older sister and younger sister. So I had to make my own do in this oil camp. And I mean, it was the kind of oil camp that had an area laid out. They had the pipe racks, places for equipment and everything. And I remember a big shed that they had, a warehouse. And it we were, I think, 5 or 6 miles from the closest town. And you could loosely call it a town.
Do you remember any of the men that worked there being called back to be in the service?
My dad got called, and it was right towards the end of the war. And they put him on a train to Chicago for a physical and to start training. And by the time he got there, the Japanese had surrendered, and he got off the train, and they said, "We don't need you. We're sending you back." So he got on the train and came home.
Wow. Okay.
I always kind of felt he did his service with the number of hours that he put in getting the oil and supplying it for the armed services.
Right. Right. When if you close your eyes and you think about Worland and your neighborhood, what do you think of? What do you see?
Mainly, I see houses being built because this was the time that the Evans addition was growing, and there were just houses being built all over the place. And like I said, Walt Wyman lived there, and Bob Cronky, and they were a year ahead of me. But the 3 of us played around these houses, and there was a drainage canal down at the end of the street, and we played a lot of games down there. And one time dug a tunnel underneath a beet field. And when the folks found out about that, they all went haywire because it afraid of caving in. So they got it caved in somehow, and I don't remember, but we used to spend a lot of time down in that irrigation canal. It was a drainage canal from all the irrigating that was going on in there. And So we had a lot of fun down there and then playing around the houses as they were being built.
I remember,
Yeah.
I remember doing that too. Where I grew up, there were houses being built and playing in the mud. What do you see about, what do you think about downtown? What do you remember about downtown Worland during that time?
Oh, I remember the movie theater because they'd have the matinees on Saturday for, I believe it was a dime or 15 cents. And so if you talk your folks out of a quarter, you could buy your ticket in and have enough for a bag of popcorn or Coke or something, candy bar. But it's just, remember pretty consistently going down in in the winter to the theater, the matinees. Of course, in the summer, they opened the drive-in, and it had the one out north of town, and which lasted for quite a while. And then there was one out east of town, and that right out by the cafe out there now, and it didn't last very long, as I can remember. Just not enough business for two drive-ins in the summertime.
Great. What about the area surrounding our town of Worland? What do you remember about that area?
Did a lot of hunting. We go rabbit hunting, would walk out from the house, go pheasant hunting, and after I got old enough to drive, got a car, then would drive out to the Badlands and the areas, so the farm areas up to the Laird farm, and hunt pheasant because that supplied some nice dinners for the family, and it was enjoyable. And we would cheat a little bit, go out and hunt them at night, which was not exactly kosher, but nobody caught us, so we had our fun. And but it just spent a lot of times out in the Badlands, messing around, especially after my dad got a Jeep and I could borrow it, go out and drive around the hills, climb the hills. Just had a lot of fun.
If we go back to high school, you played football. Did you play any other sports?
Well, I tried out for basketball and couldn't make the team. I guess I wasn't agile enough. And I wrestled for a while.
Okay.
And but then my dad decided I needed to be spending more time at the station. And having problems getting help hired. So pretty soon, one strange thing about high school, every year I had a study hall as the last class for the day. And so a lot of times I would sneak out of school and go to work at my dad's station. I did that up until about the last week of school. And I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Coach, he was a short guy. And he was assistant principal, I think, at the high school. But he caught me sneaking out. He went along that staircase. It was up high along the gymnasium. That went back out to the ag area. He was sitting up there in the window watching for me. He caught me leaving. And so I got kicked out of school for
You're kidding.
skipping class. And so I went home and laughed about it to my mom. She didn't laugh. She loaded me up and took me back to the school and explained what I was doing, was, going to work. And so they did give me a forgiveness and let me back in. So I was back in school for the final week.
Did you get to go early, or did you still have to go to your study hall?
I still had to go to my study hall.
Okay.
By then, it was the last week of school, so there wasn't much going on. But all during high school, I don't know how many times I skipped out and didn't get caught. But I'd learned the secret to it.
What was that?
Well, they had the big study hall on the first floor, if you remember. It's the first big room you walked into to come in.
I remember.
And they would take roll. And if you weren't in this class, like it was a study hall, like you were supposed to be, they would send the list down to the library. And they would check you off the list if you were in the library. So I figured out the timing on it, and I would catch the person who was carrying the list down on the stairs and say, "Oh, I'm here, you can check me off." So they would check me off the list and I would take off. And I got away with that, I don't know how many times. And but like I said, then I'd go down and go to work at the station. And I worked at the station, like I said, just about every day after school, and then most of the weekends. And because by that time I had learned how to do just about everything that needed to be done. And I was more dependable than hired help. My dad was hired. He made sure of that. He made sure I was dependable. But going in junior high, he made me a deal. He said, "I'll buy you a lawnmower when you go out and find, I think, either 3 or 5 lawns to mow and get paid for." So I said, okay. So I went out and I came back and I had 7 lawns lined up. And he kept his word. He bought me a gasoline powered mower. And so for several summers, I mowed lawns.
You're a hard worker.
Yeah, that's one thing my dad installed in me, was to be a worker. And then a lot of times during the winter, I go out and scoop sidewalks, make a little bit of extra change and everything.
Mm-hmm. Did you belong to any youth groups or church groups or clubs?
Well, I was a Boy Scout
Okay.
through high school, and it got my Eagle Scout, which is about the highest one you can get in a scout. And so I was real active in the troop. And during the summer, we go up on the mountain and camp quite a bit. And then we had a summer camp up on the mountain. And it was on the Buffalo side of the mountain. And it was a very nice camp. And to get there, I remember in particular, one year, the scoutmaster got this hay truck, I would call it, had the big bed on the back. And we packed the whole troop, all of our gear, everything on the back of that truck, and went up the mountain and came back down the mountain. And of course, now you wouldn't get away with that.
You
I mean,
certainly would not.
the kids sitting there on the back of the bed of that truck, going up the mountain. But we went up, we had our summer camps, had several different camps, and the Boy Scout cabin is still there at Deer Haven. It's out of you go out of Deer Haven going up West End Road. It's the first cabin off to the right, and I remember that cabin being there when I was in Scouts and spending nights in it. I remember spending one winter night when it was a little bit chilly up there, and we kept the fire going very good all night. But it just had some good times up there. Went cave exploring up there in the back caves, as we call them, and they were ankle deep in bat manure or guano, as it was called. And we'd go up there and mess around and try to avoid the bat guano, but we ended up in it. We had fun. And, just
Do you remember anything about the clothes we wore or the fashion of the day? Hairstyles or clothing?
jeans and t-shirts were the thing I remember the boys wearing. That's the only thing I remember. Frank Aldrich always dressed up when he came to school. For some reason, his folks wanted him dressed up. And he would have on a pair of slacks and a dress shirt. And we just figured what we expected. So when he wore jeans to school, we'd ask him what was going on. But other than that, it was jeans for most of the boys. Now the girls had to wear skirts. They weren't allowed to wear slacks or anything at that point. But,
That's right.
Yeah, but that and the big frilly skirts.
Mm-hmm.
If you got three of you walking down the hall together, you block the whole hallway.
You're right.
And then I remember the girl when they had those big frilly skirts on. If they had a low locker, they come up and they bend over, and everybody get a good laugh out of that. And all the slips that you wore under the skirts.
Oh, those petticoats, yeah.
Petticoat frillies, and you poor ladies were not allowed to wear slacks or jeans or anything like that to school.
That's right. We weren't.
On special occasions that I can't remember what they were, but there'd be occasions where they would allow it.
Yeah, maybe on football game days, I think they could wear those black saddle pants that maybe, I don't remember much, but I think we did. Do you remember television during those days? Did you have television?
Yes, we did. My dad, the house we bought had a basement in it, and my dad finished it off, and that's where my bedroom was. I had a bedroom and my own bath downstairs. That's also where the TV room was. We had a big piano down there. And I remember, the thing I remember most about the TV is that my older sister's boyfriend, Dean Harris, would come over and watch TV, and he'd watch it past when everybody else had gone to bed. He'd sit there and watch TV and then let himself out. And it was perfectly fine with the folks. He was just, he was a nice friend and a good boyfriend of my sister.
Mm.
But I remember the TV and signing off with the national anthem, which everybody would kind of sit there and pay attention to. Just And, we only had 2 or 3 channels. One of them being Thermopolis, KTHE, and the other one, Casper. And how we got Casper in there, I wasn't sure, but it was all on cable TV. Nothing, no air TV. Had cable TV. You had to pay for it. And eventually, I think they got more channels on the cable TV. But it started off, I remember, just 2 channels.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came on, it had a big national anthem type show. And the last thing at night when it signed off, it played the national anthem.
Yes, it did. I know that you were a hard worker and your dad was. What did your mother do while you were at school?
She worked for several years at the Methodist Church as a secretary. And I'm not sure if, I think that was during while I was in school there. She was the secretary at the Methodist Church. And it seems like she did something else. I can't remember what it was, but both my folks worked. My dad, before he had the station, worked the oil fields, and he worked extremely hard. Was gone a lot. When he got fired, it was on my mother's birthday.
Mm.
And after that, she said it was the best birthday present she'd ever had.
Well, it sounds like it. Yeah.
So it took his, then he started being around more. He was now.
Right. What do you think, what experiences that you had growing up in Worland do you think impacted your life as an adult?
Oh, I think the freedom my folks gave me to go out and go hunting and go fishing. It was just something I enjoyed so much. Like I said, Gary Banu and I would a lot of times close our dates down early on Saturday night. And we'd get together, drive up the mountain, sleep in the car, and get up and go fishing the next morning, daybreak. And we did that several times.
The other thing it seems to me that you learned growing up was to be a really hard worker. What did you do in your adult life? What was your work?
Well, when I went to college, I worked up in Billings, worked part-time at a gas station. Then I left school and went to Denver because my best friend, Jim Storr, was in Denver and he could buy beer for $4 a case. So I loaded up and I went to Denver and went to work at a life insurance company in the accounting. Well, it wasn't the accounting, it was more of the policy owner service area. But they were on unit records, the punch card systems in their computer systems. Well, it was a unit, like I said, a unit record is what it was called. And so I worked on keeping controls because they'd have to balance out the runs and everything. And then the company asked me if I would take a test at IBM. And it got me out of work for half a day. So I said, fine. I went to IBM and took this test. But turned it out later, I found out it was a computer programming test to see if you had the aptitude towards computer programming. And I evidently, according to what one of my bosses told me, I passed the test with the highest score in the company. And so they asked me if I wanted to go on and go to computer school and explained that, what I'd be doing and everything. And so I said, yes, I'll be happy to do it. I walked out of the meeting and I had my immediate boss with me. And I said, what's a computer? And he said, those IBM things. Oh, okay. So I had volunteered to go to school for something that I didn't even know what it was. And it got into the classes and I couldn't grasp what was needed. I just kept having problems trying to figure out what was going on. And so I went into my boss at the insurance company and told him that I just wasn't getting it. And he said, you're going back to that, and you're roughing it out until the end of that class because your score indicated you had an aptitude for it and you're going to find it. So I went back and all of a sudden, everything just fell into place. And I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. Just like that. I mean, it has always amazed me to this day how fast everything just came together. And so I started learning how to program a computer, a 1401 computer. It had a basic 8K of memory, and it had an additional 4K. The 8K of memory took up an area about, I want to say 4 foot, 5 foot high, 3.5 feet wide, and about 10 foot long. And that was the 4K of memory and the card reader. No, that wasn't even the card reader. The card reader was separate. But this is where all the logic and everything went on. And so we sat down and programmed how to convert the data that was in the punch card system over to information that can be fed into the computer, and worked on that for about a year or two, and got the company all converted and went from punch card to computer. And it was a fun time, a lot of long hours. And my boss complained one time that with my hours getting paid overtime, which he wasn't, I was making more money than he was. But it still kept good. It's a good relationship. But then I started meeting people from out of state, going to conventions. We converted to this system that was called CFO2, Consolidated Functions Ordinary. And there were life insurance companies all over the United States that were adapting into this IBM system. And so we would go to annual conventions on it and learn about different ways to do things, pick up ideas from other people, share ideas. I presented a paper to the meeting, it was just a collection of people who were all doing the same thing. And we would give each other ideas on problems we'd come across and how we solved them. And it just went to a trip down to Houston. They had some of the meetings in Dallas and some other town, I can't remember where, but it was, the startup of the computers era. This was back in the early 60s. And that's when the businesses started using the computers. And it grew from there, and I eventually went to work with one of the fellows who had developed this IBM system. We had a consulting firm, and then I decided I wanted to go out on my own and had enough of Texas. So I did move to Chicago for a year or two and worked for a life insurance company there. They had gotten into some problems and needed someone to get them out. And I had enough experience that I was able to solve their major problems and get them on the right track and everything. But I ended up moving to Casper and set up a computer business there, handling. This was back when the long distance companies came up, popped up, where you would hire a long distance company to do your phone calls, your long distance calls, and because it was so expensive, I remember the rates being like 10 to 15 cents a minute to make a long distance call. Well, the phone companies were charging much more than this. So these individuals would go out and make a deal with the phone companies where they would buy so much time from them. And they would go out and sell the time to individuals. And then the individuals could make phone calls cheaper than they could through the main phone company. But they had to have a way of accounting and keeping track of these phone calls and doing a billing. So I developed a system on the computers for collecting the calls, getting them tied to the right person. You'd have to have a master record for everyone that was using the phone service. And then at the end of the month, do a billing. And so I did that for a few years. Then I developed a back problem and a couple of other problems, and it had to quit working. Just the body gave out on me for a while. So I quit working, and it went on retirement. Excuse me. And from there on, just did part-time work, and it just got to the point where I am now, retired. But it was rather interesting time there.
It sounds like it. Sounds like you were in on the real beginning of the conversion to computers.
Oh, it was. It was a lot of fun, a lot of long hours.
Mm.
I remember one week that I worked a weekend about 35 hours.
Mm.
Then the next week, I worked about the normal 40 hours. Then the following weekend, I worked 40 some hours straight through.
Wow.
And you had to take the computer time when you could find it. And I was helping companies who had problems and getting their problems solved. And sometimes when you solved a problem, you'd have to run their entire master file against it. Well, that could take several hours. And but you had to stay around in case something went wrong and the program blew. Because when the program blew, they just shut everything down.
What do you think of the fact that that big computer you had is now less powerful than the one you're using right now?
That computer we had then is less power than this right here.
That's what I was, yeah, than the phone even.
Yeah. Well, actually, they say now that there's more power in a smartphone than there were in the computers if they sent the man to the moon on.
Hmm.
And but it's yeah, it's what's been fun watching the computer industry develop. And it went through several steps. In computer ease, we went from the 1400 series to the 360 series. They call them 360s, and they brought out the 370. And that's when it started getting the speeds up to match or see what they have today. But seeing the old unit record equipment, which was the punch cards, and how they would run these punch cards through different programs that were hardwired into these machines up to the point where you put them on a computer, and then eventually you came into where your data entry was online through things, computers like this. It was quite a lot of fun watching the growth and the change of the industry.
I'm sure, especially since you had so much knowledge about the goings on of it. Tell me, what brought you full circle back to Worland?
Well, when I moved back to Casper, I enjoyed Wyoming much more than I did Texas. Well, I didn't like the heat for one thing, and I missed the skiing. I like the snow skiing. Casper has skiing range, and I like to snowmobile and like to water ski, which did out of Alcova in Casper. And so even after I went into disability retirement, I kept contact with Worland. And I bought a RV park in Casper and ran it for a couple, 3 years and built it up. I mean, it was, when I bought it, it basically abandoned. And I bought it, fixed it up, built the business up, and sold it. And because it was wearing me out. I was getting older by that time, and long hours just got to be too much for me. So I sold it and then did piddly things around Worland or Casper for a while. And then met a young lady from Worland online on the computer. So I came to Worland and lived with her for a while. And we split up, and I just kind of hung around Worland. And I go south in the winter. I'll head down to Yuma, first part of October, and spend the winter down there.
Where do you spend the winter?
Yuma, Arizona.
Yuma, okay.
Yeah. I've got a lady friend down there that I've met, and so we see each other. But it's just one of these days I'm going to have to settle down and make a decision where I'm going to stay. It's getting too old for this back and forth, spring and the fall. But I enjoy just being in different places, and because it's been an interesting life.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about or mention before we end our interview?
Oh, it just how much I enjoyed growing up in Worland. I didn't realize it until later, but some of the things that we could do. For example, we carry guns in our car. You couldn't do that in the cities. We'd get out of school, go hunting, get out of school, go fishing. I thought, growing up, I kept saying, God, there's nothing to do in Worland. Well, I got off to college and started talking to some of these kids that they'd never gone out and gone hunting, never gone rabbit hunting, never gone pheasant hunting, never gone fishing, never gone snowmobiling up in the mountains, never snow skied, never water skied. They lived in the big city, and their main entertainment was the youth centers. Well, they had to pay to get in those, and we just, had so much more we could do around Worland, and so much of it was, I say, free. I mean, we had to pay for gas and things like that, but it just, and all the dances we had, so many things like that we had in Worland growing up. That so many other kids that I talked to when I got off college.
There were a lot of dances.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a lot of fun times. I enjoyed, growing up there in Worland. And I enjoy coming back here now, except that with the COVID, it just shut everything down. And Worland is slowly trying to come out of it, but it's unfortunately it's kind of a dying city. We used to have 20 some gas stations here. Now there's four, excuse me. So many of the businesses downtown have closed down. It's such a shame because, people are doing, and I'm guilty of it also, doing so much by mail, Amazon, and things like that, there's not even a men's clothing store in town anymore. And I'm not sure if there's a women's clothing store. But Main Street has just, changed dramatically from what it was. I remember Saturday night dragging Maine. Mm-hmm. Well, now you go down there and you can shoot a shotgun down Main Street on Saturday night and not hit anything. It's really too bad. I hate watching a town kind of die off, but people are coming to town.
Maybe we can all keep our fingers crossed that something will happen to bring a little more life back to town.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. And I think what's so funny is there's very few homes available for sale. You'd think with things dying off like it was, that people would be moving out. But I understand that there's a lot of people who have been moving in who work from their home. And they like Worland for just living in, and the school system is good. got a very low crime rate,
Mhm.
in spite of the facts that we've got 5 times more police than we had when we were growing up. And they've got maybe a 1/4%, more population.
Mhm.
But I remember we had 3 cops down. Now I think they've got 13 or 14.
Hmm.
And but it's just, but you don't hear about any problems or anything like that. Not much crime here in Worland. The cops are all watching out for speeding, and they say there's somewhat of a drug problem in Worland, but if there is, I haven't seen any sign of it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, of course, they aren't going to want to mess around with the old fart like they want to mess around with people who's going to buy their drugs. But
Well, Dean, I'm going to say thank you for sharing with us and sharing for generations to come. They may listen to your story about your years in Worland and your life and enjoy hearing what things were like in those days.
well, I want to thank you all for going to the trouble and work that you have had to put in on this project.
Well, Kathy's really the one that's done this. This is Kathy's baby, and she's done most of the work.
Well,
everyone's chipped in. I have one question, Dean.
Okay.
When you talked about the drain ditch that you played in, is that the drain ditch that goes along to the south of Warshke Avenue?
Yeah. That was a regular playground for Walt Wyman, Bob Kroenke, and myself. We'd go down there and play cowboys and Indians, tag. We collect things because a lot of people would throw things out in there. It was a fun place to be. And you couldn't fish there because there was no place for the fish to come in from. But it was a very fun place to play. Plus, it was close to us. It was maybe about a block from our house, and we could go down there and play all day. And of course, one thing you didn't do was stay out too late and miss supper, because if you miss supper, you miss supper. It's just, it was amazing when I got off to college and started talking to the kids in the big cities and everything, how many more activities that I had to do, outdoors, that they had no idea about. And I didn't think it at the time. I thought how boring Worland was. But after getting out and seeing the rest of the world, I found out Worland wasn't boring. Worland was a very, very nice place to grow up in. And I'm just so happy I was able to do that.
Well, thank you, Dean.
Well,
thank you for doing this recording.
Well, thank you for getting it all together.